So we have so many great events in Northern Colorado.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And one of the special events that you actually ended up attending was the police canine demo talk at the Elizabeth.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. You were there as well, so
Yes.
it was fun to just kind of all of us go there and check out what the canines do.
Yeah.
And I was actually really surprised. There's a lot of great information there.
Yeah, there were so many things that I was like, I had no idea that so much training. I mean, it's obvious that training goes into this.
Right.
But it's like, there's so many different types of training, and like, there was just so many steps to it, and like, so many different types of dog behaviors that they have to like account for. I don't know. It was just like information overload.
Well, I think some of my takeaways on that were, that first off, they use those dogs more flexibly than I ever knew.
Right.
Like they came up with several points that we'll get into that it was like, I never thought about that. That's a great idea.
Right.
And then also, of course, the training and so forth that's geared around getting in the dog's head.
Yeah.
And how dogs see the world. And I thought that was one of the most fascinating things, was to stop and picture that when we or you walk into a room, we look through the room and we take it in using our eyes.
Yeah.
And maybe the sound is next, and probably smell is third, and for dogs, smell is first.
Right.
So when they walk in, they feel the room through their sense of smell. And so they know what's going on in the room by what they're smelling. And just totally different. So when you're training and you're trying to communicate with a dog, you got to get down on their level, and you've got to be able to train and make sure that they're doing what they need to do through their eyes and not ours.
Yeah, you really have to think about it from a whole new perspective. And it's funny because after the event, I noticed it in my own dogs, like walking into a room and then all of a sudden they're only relying on smell before they even like look around or anything like that.
Right. No, that was really cool. And of course, all just the information about how the police department trains them, where they get them from. All that was fascinating.
Right. I thought that was super interesting. So they have 7 dogs.
Right.
6 of those are either German Shepherds or Malinois or a mix.
Right.
And then they have 1 Labrador.
Right.
And all of the Malinois German Shepherds are multi-use.
Right.
They do drug and
Apprehension.
And then the Labrador has a single job. He's got 1 job.
Yeah.
And he's by far the most expensive. He's their bomb detecting dog.
Right. It's interesting that they can smell explosives on the move like that, like moving through a crowd, and then follow the person that has gunpowder or has some explosives on them. Was really fascinating.
Right.
And how they train them by scent on a wire, where they're sending something down a wire and the dog's got to follow where that scent went.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I've also learned that with that particular dog, that's the dog that you can't touch.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. It's like, they don't take him to any demonstrations or anything because it's way too valuable of a dog. But even like other officers and so forth, it's like, you don't pet that dog.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's obviously their most expensive dog because of all the training he goes through, and I think they said that they train most of those dogs in Auburn University in Alabama.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, all the dogs coming from one place, that's going to be an expensive dog.
Oh, I would think so. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a monopoly on that particular training. The other dogs were very fascinating as far as what all they did. I thought one of the things that really stood out was when they were talking about, pursuit or apprehension of criminals and so forth, and how people just, that they might be standing up to the officers. They might be barricaded in a house or something along that line. They're not coming out for the cops. They'll stand up to the police. But as soon as they hear the word canine or we're sending in the fur missile, they're done. They're coming out. Whoa, whoa, whoa. And of course, that's the way I'd be too. I mean, I know these dogs well enough to know I ain't messing with them.
Yeah, I mean, every time you see any sort of police movie or anything like that, like the dog is all sparring its teeth and barking, and you're like, oh, man,
through the window like a missile.
Yeah, I don't want that latched onto my leg or anything like that. So it definitely makes sense that they would, I mean, even just the threat of the dog would make me give up and be like, no, it's not worth going to the hospital on top of this.
The thing that was really interesting was that I think in Larimer County, or maybe it was just Fort Collins, Loveland, he was asking how many times dogs had bitten somebody, and I'm thinking like, 100 or 150. They must send these things in everywhere, and it was 3.
Yeah.
I just thought that was really. That's how often. Now the dog's been used constantly, daily and only 3 times have they sent that dog in order to actually have to bite somebody to subdue them. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
It shows how effective that use is.
Yeah, and it really shows that the dog is really good at what it does.
Right.
That like even though it's not biting people every single day, I mean, it's getting the job done.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was talking about how it's the only
Tool. We'll call
the
it
only
tool.
tool.
Yeah.
It was the only tool they can use where it's like once you release it, you can direct it to go somewhere else.
Yeah, it'd go around a corner.
Yeah.
So you've got somebody that's under a bridge or something along that
Yes.
line, and you can't use a taser, you can't use rubber balls or whatever they call those.
Yeah.
And you want to be able to send in something non-lethal in order to extract that person or subdue that person. The dog will go around the corner. No other
Yeah.
tool in their arsenal will do that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't just like get your taser to go around a corner.
Yeah, you don't
or
necessarily
anything.
want to be the first one to poke your head around that corner, not knowing what's waiting for you there.
Exactly, yeah. And it's I can imagine, I mean, dogs are a much smaller target anyway.
Right.
And they've got protective vests that he showed us and
And the different kinds of vests. Ones
Yeah.
I never thought about that. I'm sure dogs have a bulletproof vest or at least some protection, some armor that they wear. But yet, if you ran the dog all day wearing that, you would wear the dog out very quickly because
Yeah.
it's heavy.
Yeah.
And it would be the same. You look at a lot of these guys that are wearing. We wore plates when we were in the military, and they're heavy. And you're running and so forth. You really got to train for that. But for dogs, they have a light vest that they normally wear, and then if they're going to send them into a dangerous situation, then they'll put on that other vest.
right, which totally makes sense. Not something that I would have thought of at all until
Right.
this talk. So
Yeah, I thought that was neat.
very, very interesting.
I thought it was really interesting where they got the dogs from
Yeah.
and how much they cost. Now, I don't know what I was expecting on cost. I guess if he would have said, "Oh, they're $100,000 a dog," I would have been like, "Wow, that's a ton." And if he was like, "Yeah, they're about $800," I would have been like, "Wow, that sounds like somewhere." But he said they were about $10,000-15,000
Yep.
on the average, and I thought, that's a really reasonable price for something you're going to get. 7 years, maybe longer out of that's going to be such a versatile tool. And of course, that doesn't include training. That's just
Right.
bringing in the puppies. And of course,
Yes.
you've got the risk that you're going to pick up a dog, and they do a great job selecting them and making sure that they're going to, work in an environment. They take them outside the kennel. They take them into, Home Depot, test them how they're going to work around people and so
Yeah.
forth before they buy the dogs. But you still have the risk that you're going to get them back, and then all of a sudden that dog's going to be like, "Oh, this dog won't work in this situation."
Right. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that he was like, yeah, you definitely have to take them away from their litter mates because otherwise you might get one dog that's acting all tough around all of his
Right,
friends,
right.
but then as soon as he's by himself in Home Depot and those automatic doors open, he
Yeah.
might be a total coward and like
Right.
run away. And that obviously won't work. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
That was fascinating. I loved some of the training tools that they continue to use after that as well. So they bring the dog in, they train the dog, but it's a constant thing to keep training these dogs through their entire life because you can't ever give them any flexibility along that line. And of course, with our dogs, they're pets, so we're very flexible with
Right.
our punishments and so forth. It's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that."
Yeah.
And if we do that all the time, then the dog understands that, "Oh, don't do that on the third try." Means something because that's when there's some action. And of course, you
Right.
can't do that, especially with a police dog.
Yes.
You don't want to have to call it 3 times to stop it from running out into traffic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So-
Or give it the command 3 times to go chase that guy. I mean, that
Right.
guy could get away by then. Or
No, I said go get him. No,
Yeah.
I said go
Right.
get him. Well, wait, are you really mean
Are
go get
you
him, or
sure?
should I sit here and just wait?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really interesting. And of course, the tools that they use for that are, a lot of positive reinforcement. I thought it was really interesting that when that dog goes to work, that dog's having fun.
Yeah.
Now, our dog, being a Border Collie Australian Shepherd, it's a work dog. So when it goes to work, it's going to work. It is having fun. But at the same time,
so
it doesn't-
intense.
It's so intense. It doesn't look like it's out there having fun. It looks like it's like working, right?
Right.
And so it's hard for me to perceive that, like, when the dog is after somebody, it's playtime.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, oh, this is great. This is going to be great. So when they put on like the arms and the suit in which they kind of wrestle with the dog and so forth, or let the dog, for bite training and so forth, that dog is having a good time.
Right.
That dog is having a great time. The poor decoy that's in the suit probably isn't having as great of a time.
Right.
But
I thought it was really interesting that he was talking about that they don't have a lot of female decoys, and so sometimes when dogs end up biting a woman for the first time, her high-pitched screams or squeals will scare the dog off.
Right, because it's not used to biting onto
Yes.
anything but a male.
Yes, so that was definitely interesting. If you're female and you're looking to become a decoy, you're in high demand,
I'll
and they
bet
would
you
be more than willing to probably accept you.
I'll
so.
bet you're absolutely right. And that was an interesting thing. I never thought of. There's so many
No.
little things in that training. I'm so glad that Fort Collins is like putting on these little things to get the public used to or are familiar with the dogs that are
Yeah.
that are their canines and other things that they do. I love that kind of transparency piece or that education of the population. And then not so much so as well, like, they're not going to tell you what the dog commands are.
Right.
It's hard to figure out the dog's names typically. They'll tell you,
Right.
but it's not like published any place.
Yeah.
Anything that would allow a criminal to have an advantage over the dog, you don't want people to know, but you want them to know what
Right.
the dog is. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and they do have an Instagram page, and so they've got a couple of pictures, mostly of retired dogs, and they do a couple of like videos and photos of like their current dogs. I also had a very hard time finding the dog that we met when I was looking for him on the Instagram page. I was
Right.
like, plus they all look very, very similar.
That's true, and especially when they get them and they're young, and now they're 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years old. They change a lot.
Yes.
So you see the early pictures of, hey, City of Fort Collins got a new dog.
Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of the same color. I don't know.
Right.
So.
And especially when, German Shepherd, Malinois,
Right.
yeah, I'm not going to be able to tell the difference between a bunch of those dogs.
Right, right.
Because they're not my dog. So,
Yeah, and it's interesting the bond between the handler and the dog. Obviously you have to have really good trust there. They take the dogs home with them,
Right.
but they're not a pet.
Yes.
So that's the other thing is that some police officers bring them into the household, most keep them outside and so forth, and it's not because they're a danger to their family. It's just that you really have to keep that dog's mind and so forth in the right place. It's not going to have a nice
Right.
warm snuggly spot on the couch until it retires.
Right.
It's a work dog, and I think that's really important. Especially we use dogs that way for hunting, for herding and so forth and all, and they're tools to be used for that.
Yes.
But as pet owners, it's hard for us to see them in that light.
Yep.
Because we find them warm and snuggly.
absolutely. And I thought that it was really interesting that when they go into retirement, it's usually around like 6 to 9 years old.
Right.
Which is probably the halfway point of their lives.
Oh, sure.
For most dogs. And so retirement is a generous part of their life. So
Yeah.
it's not all work, no play.
Right, right. Even though I did find that the other interesting thing is when you have a dog that has a purpose that's focused, and then it goes into retirement. A lot of times those dogs don't live a long time because their
Right.
purpose is kind of taken away. So it depends on if they have a lot of continued purpose and so forth after their retirement,
Right.
depending on whether they're just going to kind of be like, oh, I guess I'm done. And it's funny, people are like that too.
Yeah.
If you get somebody who retires and they go do a lot of charity work and they have a big purpose in life, they tend to live a long, full life. When they
Sure.
retire and they're like, oh, good, I don't have to do anything anymore.
And then they don't do
You,
anything.
you get a couple of years and they're done. And so it's interesting that dogs are the same way.
Yeah, and I think that really shows the importance of choosing the right family in retirement
Sure.
for each of the dogs.
Sure, yes, absolutely. Well, there's a lot of other interesting factors that come into those dogs and so forth. What were a couple of things that stood out for you?
I think that it was really interesting with all the different uses of the dog, and specifically scent tracking.
Right.
Not just for apprehension, but like for officers who might lose their keys.
Like property recovery.
Yes, and I had never ever thought of that.
Sure,
as
if
like
you're
a
chasing
job.
somebody across a field,
Yeah.
and of course they have a ton of gear on them. I think they have about 800 pounds of gear on them. If you ask them, that's about right.
Yeah.
And they tackle somebody down, or they're down on the ground with somebody. Yeah, I mean, the chances of keys falling, or the chances
Or
of
flashlight
a
or
radio or something,
Yes.
falling off is relatively high, I would think. And I've get 6 or 7 officers in a field doing a grid pattern search for your equipment.
Yeah.
Seems like a huge, not a waste of resources, but at least those officers aren't on the street doing what they're supposed to do when they're looking for your whatever.
Right.
And the fact that you can send a dog out there and the dog will track down your property pretty darn quick, that's brilliant. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. And I know that Larimer County on their website has stated that the dogs save them hundreds of man hours every year, and not just with what you would think of as typical police work, but also with stuff like that.
Right, right.
But we also have narcotics detection.
Oh, sure, narcotics detection. That's what I was. I knew there was something else in there that I was
Yeah.
completely forgetting.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, the narcotics thing was really interesting too because, and of course, between the narcotics dogs and the bomb dogs, I love that camaraderie about, yeah, but my dog can sniff a quarter ounce of something and yours needs a pound of gunpowder to track it down.
Right.
But the fact that they're just so good at being able to track down, different narcotics, and there was 5, 6, 7 that they were very much trained on, and they're very good about sniffing that out.
I thought it was really interesting that he discussed that as we tend to legalize certain things that dogs may have been trained on before, you can't just tell the dog to forget that smell.
Yeah, sorry, you don't need to sniff out marijuana anymore.
Right.
Oh, mushrooms are now legal. Don't worry about that. That type of thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true. I never thought about that either.
But yeah, that would get you a lot of false positives per se,
Sure.
where you'd be like, oh well, yeah, you're legally allowed to have this. Sorry about that.
Right. And of course, with like a 7 to 8 plus year training time and so forth, those dogs that are trained on things that they're not needed anymore, you kind of have to wait for those dogs to get out of the circulation, if you will, before you really get one that's never been trained in that.
Right, and it's not like you want to just retire a dog as soon as policy changes, especially since policies change within a couple years, and these dogs are operating for 9 years.
Right.
That's not even close. You might as well just deal with the occasional false positive.
yeah. And I mean, I'm sure that's an inconvenience, but I mean, people have got to understand as well that, they're going to have those kind of things that pop up.
Right.
Anytime you have, something along that line.
I mean, just like anything else, if a policy changes, it still takes the general public a while to change. You got to be accepting that the dog is going to take a while.
I would think so. I would definitely think so.
So it's not just the Fort Collins Police Department that has these dogs.
Right.
I mean, you also have Larimer County, you've got other police departments. I think that it's really important to note that they also do search and rescue with these dogs because they have such intense noses. They can help you find people, just like property, way faster than you can find people. So.
Right. I don't know, if I see a German Shepherd looking for me in the woods, I'm going to worry that maybe it's a police dog.
As long as they don't
I'm not a criminal.
Command it to bite you, you should be fine. Yeah. What was the most surprising or interesting thing that you found about the talk?
Well, I think the most interesting thing, first off, the surprising thing was the fact that, that they set everything up, they came out and talked to us and so forth.
Yeah.
But I think the most interesting and surprising aspect of everything was when they brought in the dog, and I can't remember the dog's name, and I think it was Jake, his handler.
Yeah.
And Jake might have been the decoy too, but I think it was Jake. How much his dog just drooled everywhere.
Right. He was so excited about that toy.
Yeah, it was like ice skating on the way out. There was just lots of drool. But it was interesting the bite that he talked about on the dog. So when he gave it its toy, it bit down on the toy way in the back of its mouth, and he went into the detail of that is a confidence thing. That if you get a dog that just bites at the tip, its front teeth, its canines, it's very unconfident with its bite. It's looking at who it's biting. It's making sure it's maintaining eye contact. But when you have a very confident dog, it goes deep on the bite.
Right.
And the decoys know that too. Because if they're getting, if they're wrestling with the dog or something and it's doing a shallow bite, of course they're going to know, versus when that dog gets back in the back of its mouth, you're really going to feel that.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
And they did have a lot of scars and so forth. They get bit. Obviously, it's their job to wrestle with the dog and so forth. But I thought it was very surprising how much they kind of blew off, how much they got bit. And, just with training the dog and so forth, and then how much drool was everywhere. With that dog.
Yeah. I think that plays right into what I found most surprising and interesting is that these dogs are not aggressive with the decoy after the decoy comes out of the suit.
Right.
It was all a game, and that guy's my friend.
It's not like he's holding a grudge.
Right.
The decoy might be holding a grudge, but the dog
broke my arm. Then but the dog is having a good time, and they're not aggressive towards other people at all. It's not this rabid dog always trying to bite somebody. I mean, they have these demonstrations and these talks with kindergarten classes.
Yeah.
Where it's little kindergartners are petting the dog, so.
They're not an aggressive dog. They're
No.
just very well trained.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, they're having a great time when they go do their job. We think, because we're terrified.
Right.
And that was something else that they said is when officers, of course, get nervous, the dog feels that as well. So it's very important for that same kind of training, if you will, to be from the handlers as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that is really interesting.
Yeah, I was really glad that we attended this talk put on by the Fort Collins Police Department and the Elizabeth Hotel.
Yeah.
It was very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to attending more Fort Collins events.
Yeah, it really just tells you why Fort Collins is just an absolute great place to live.
Absolutely.
And if you're looking for housing in Fort Collins to buy or sell, remember the Wineland team anywhere in northern Colorado, and we'll be glad to assist.
Absolutely. Give us a call.